Thanks, Jill. And those of us at Best Buy are very honored by that. Thank you so much. I do have a long connection with this neighborhood. My dad was a pastor, and in 1956, Messiah Lutheran Church, which is a couple blocks down the street, it's on 25th and Columbus, called him to the congregation. And in 1956, this neighborhood was basically a Swedish-German middle-class community with relatively few social problems, but about to go through a major change. Because what happened is those people that lived in that community and that attended this church wound up buying the houses that were built the suburbs around the Twin Cities because they wanted more land and they wanted a bigger place to live. And as that happened, this community went through a fundamental change. So I was with my dad's experience was in the process of being pastor in a church going through a profound change in terms of who was in the neighborhood and what the definition of that church in terms of serving the neighborhood was. So I'm going to tell a few stories about things in this neighborhood that touched me. One of the first of those was when I was in high school. I got my first real job outside of being a paper boy, which was at Deaconess Hospital, which used to be a few blocks away from here. And actually my dad arranged for me to get this job. Because the last thing in the world I'd want to do is be a surgical orderly. I still have a weak stomach, and that was not what I wanted to do. But I wound up coming to work and running into this absolutely wonderful man in his 40s who was an orderly. And he'd spent his entire life as an orderly. And as you can imagine, an orderly does not make a lot of money. And this man had 3 children. But he was telling a wonderful story with his life. And if you happen to be going in for surgery, and he was the guy that picked you up or prepped you for the surgery or took care of you, you didn't have to worry about that they were going to cut the wrong side, the wrong arm. If you were going to have surgery on the right arm, you didn't get the left arm cut. He absolutely put everything into that job. And I got a chance also, as I got to know him and his family, to see what it was like to live on a very low income in a neighborhood, to live on the edge, but to live in a wonderful way. So he would, one Saturday afternoon, I was over with his family, and we moved from one duplex to another in the neighborhood because that particular duplex. And I got a job back. My wife and I had just married, and we moved up to Minneapolis, and I started working back at this Messiah church as a janitor. And apparently I was a pretty good janitor because I worked my way up to whatever wasn't done by somebody else, I did. But this church, Messiah at this point, had gone back to its own stories and its own mission to try to find a new mission that touched the neighborhood and had a new dream. And they actually set up a dream which still has not been realized, and they're still trying to realize over there, which is how do we take the stories that we care about and make them relevant to this community today so that instead of being a church with a great history, we're a church with a great future that fits into the community. And it started an Alcoholics Anonymous program, it started daycare, it started summer program, an after-school program, an outreach to the elderly, program for single mothers. I mean, phenomenal amount of things for a relatively small congregation in the neighborhood. And I had the unbelievable good fortune of working in that church while I was going to school and trying to help with those projects. So you can only imagine the kinds of stories in that year I would experience in the neighborhood. So one thing I'll never forget is running into a young woman from the suburbs who newly moved into the neighborhood with a child who all of a sudden has lost her relationship with her family, lost the relationship with the father of the child, has a little baby, has absolutely no money, and is all of a sudden has all of this responsibility and is totally lost in her story. Or the opposite of that, an older man in the Alcoholics Anonymous group, 50-plus-year-old guy, absolutely jubilant about life, feels like he wasted a lot of his, but with a new relationship, a new job, starting out his life all over clean and celebrating every moment of being clean. Or, actually, we've got a picture. My wife, thankfully, dug up some pictures from 1972 of a Native American kid who lived across the street from from the church who hung out at the church. He went to the daycare. He went to the after-school program and the summer school program, and he and his family were just always part of the church. You can imagine the joy those kids were. Now, the other thing I knew about those kids living in the neighborhood is all the statistics Art can share with you about the likelihood of chemical abuse coming in their lives, the likelihood of not being able to finish school, not having the lives that those kids promised actually was there. So we were trying to touch those lives. Well, these are stories from 35 years ago in the neighborhood. But my wife worked at Anderson School in the 90s. And now, as I've gotten to know more about Urban Ventures, I got a chance to realize that those stories are still stories being lived out in this neighborhood. And there is this wonderful, rich range of lives when people are in crisis. And there's also this wonderful sense of promise of those lives of people in crisis. And so when you look at the stories that Art's telling with Urban Ventures, or Dick and Karen are telling with Alina and with their lives, powerful stories, huge potential impact. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. I'm Jim Campbell. Well, it's a real honor for me to be here tonight as a previous recipient of this wonderful award.